Get ready for an awesome conversation about the state of comics on Kickstarter.
What's so interesting about crowdfunding is it is a constant space of innovation. My favorite thing about life in general is like there's always something I don't know, right? The unknown unknown. October, November, and March were the best months of last year, both for number of launches on the site and then number of successes. Putting yourself in, I think, those uncomfortable waters really challenges you in a way to be able to communicate what you love about the medium.
The hardest thing to do is get someone to back that first project.
I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum. Don't overpromise or try and make something crazy just to catch a ton of people and get new fans in the door. Try and continue to do something that feels realistic and that you can scale.
All right. I am excited about this one, everybody. Get ready for an awesome conversation about the state of comics on Kickstarter. And I'm joined by the perfect guest to talk to me about this topic. My guest today is the senior outreach lead for the comics category on Kickstarter. He is experienced in both the retail side of the comics industry, the creative side of the comics industry. He's had experience working at Boom Studios on some of their biggest Kickstarter launches. He also worked closely with James Tinian and his Tiny Onion entrepreneurial endeavors. He's used Kickstarter to fund his own RPGs as a creator himself, and he just brings a wealth of experience, enthusiasm, and knowledge and insights, blending both the business and the creative side of the industry that we all love. So welcome to Comics Launch, Sam Kusek. Sam, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Tyler. Thank you for having me, and thanks for such a warm introduction. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's nice to have you on. I've been champing at the bit since you were announced as taking over the lead, the outreach lead on Kickstarter several months ago. But I, wanted to have you on the show because we're always interested. We're glad that comics has a lead in that space. There was a time like post pandemic when everything was publishing and comics sort of didn't get sole focus, and so it's good to have someone on the Kickstarter back end that's in there. And now that you've sort of been in the role for several months now, I guess where I'd like to start, just and for the audience context, is what's the role of comics lead over at Kickstarter? What is a day in your working life like in this interesting position?
Yeah, no, that's a great starting point. So, my background, in addition to my comics experience, both working in retail and publishing, like you said, I was a project manager in web development and design for about 10 years. And like that, this role is like 90% communication, I would say. I start my days with getting through my email inbox. I work with a team internally to send things over for PWL consideration. I'm also able to recommend projects either upcoming or current for newsletter placement. So in our projects we love and our new and trending newsletter. And I also, over the course of the day and the week, have a lot of conversations with repeat creators and new creators. So my job, I would say it's a 60-40 split of 60% of my time is spent talking to repeat creators, addressing any issues they might have, be it like, I want to get a pre-launch page spun up for this event. Can you help me sort of expedite the process?
Mm.
Or, I have this issue I need consultation about. I helped Keith Knight with a stretch goal, for instance. He was looking for advice on stretch goals, and I was able to give him a couple of options, and he was able to make the choice ultimately. And then that other 40% is reaching out to the comics community at large and saying, hey, here's what Kickstarter can offer you. Here are the benefits of crowdfunding, and talking to them about whether or not they might have a project that would be suitable for crowdfunding, right? We've seen a growth of new creators over the past couple of years, and a lot of different kinds of creators, right? People coming
Yeah.
in from different industries, or I've been talking to some folks in the YouTube community who are interested in bringing projects over. So it's a really exciting time, I think, to be at Kickstarter, and particularly in the comic space, because unlike like a film or publishing or an art, our time to market is so much quicker, which means people can do things like produce a couple of campaigns over the course of the year, as opposed to like film, it could take a year or multiple years to complete a film and finish it. You're less likely, I think, at that point to want to run another campaign while you're still producing a film. But if you come to table for Kickstarter with a comic already done and you're just looking to set print orders, you print that thing a couple months later, you're shipping it out, and then you can go to the next one and spin another campaign up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that makes the comics category pretty special and unique is just the amount of reps that we can get in. And I know you did a webinar masterclass not too long ago that I checked out, and just you had some numbers for 2024 as sort of being a pretty good year for comics on the Kickstarter platform. But can you speak to that a little bit of just like, what is the state of the union? Is it strong, Sam?
It's
How are you
strong,
feeling about
yeah.
it? Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty good. So, we saw a 5.25% growth in launches since last year and a 5.51% increase in successes from last year.
Hmm.
And I'm happy to report I listened to your podcast the other week about how many tiers are too many tiers, and you
Mm.
got to the point where you were doing that investigation looking at the info on Kickstarter, and it got me thinking about, oh, I should take a look at per month, how did we do across the year? And I'm
Mm.
happy to report that 10 of the 12 months were up in terms of successful campaigns. So up from last year, anywhere between, I think, like 10 to 15%, which is great.
Yeah.
And a really interesting thing I found, and I'm still figuring out exactly why this is, but October, November, and March were the best months of last year, both for number of launches on the site and then number of successes, which is kind of counter to, I think, the traditional advice that I've been giving or that I've heard from other creators,
Mm.
where the spring and the summer feel really solid for launches. But to see October and November, particularly November, when things start to slow down, when you hit the holidays and Thanksgiving, to see that be really, really successful time is really interesting to me. So, overall, to answer the question as it was asked, like, we're doing really well. The year had a 77.6 success rate, 3,406 projects launched, 2,642 of them were successful. I think those are really great numbers, and I think we're just continuing to see a steady trend of newer folks coming in, but more importantly, those creators who have been on the site for a while continuing to have success, building up audience, gaining traction, just sharing more in that community. I think it creates a really inviting environment.
Yeah, and when you share those kinds of data, it bolsters the fact because another thing that Kickstarter also set a new all-time funding high for a project with the big Skybound GI Joe
Yeah.
collection. And so, sometimes people are skeptical. They'll go, oh, 40 million. Yeah, but Skybound got most of that. It's like, well, they got a chunk of it, that's for sure. But the total number of projects is still growing. New people are still finding the platform. First time creators are still jumping in and launching. And I think that bodes very well just for, this is no longer the just, flash in the pan. This is how things are done. I want to go back a little bit before we dive, even more into just the state of play here in comics and Kickstarter. But just to talk about a little bit about, your background, people get to know you a little bit better. Like, what first drew you to the comics industry? Were there certain comics that impacted you from an early start and made you want to sort of be in this wacky world? What was sort of your comics origin story? You're rocking an awesome sweater here. But what were some of those seminal?
I've been reading comics for as long as I can remember. So my uncle is an artist. He's a fine artist by trade, and I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in Half Moon Bay, California, and he would bring stuff from Japantown and Chinatown. So I had a very sort of early introduction to manga and anime, which kind of caught my eye. I'm 37 years old now. I was at the right age when Power Rangers hit. That was a
Mm.
big thing for me. And so that kind of like bright and colorful entertainment philosophy or just entertainment groundwork was really just integral to my growing up. The first comic I think that really had a big impact on me was probably Mark Waid's Impulse. Being a young kid who loved running around and then seeing a young kid run who's power was to literally run around and like wreak havoc was wonderful. And I just continued reading comics throughout my entire life. The way that I got into comics professionally is I went to school at Emerson College, studied marketing communications, and during that time I was buying a lot of comics and I met people who were doing comic review writing. So I started reviewing manga, getting to know publishers that way, and the more I got to know the shops in the Boston area, primarily Comicopia and Kamikaze, I got introduced to just the wider world of comic signings, events that were happening there, and just really dug my teeth into that community. And that allowed me to get noticed by some publishers, primarily Boom Studios, who I've worked the most for. And I got hired after working for Kamikaze for a number of years as their events coordinator. Boom brought me on as a direct market representative. So for me, I mean, the long and short of it is just like I got interested in something. I kept showing up at the places where I felt like things were happening. And
Mm.
eventually, like, I ended up meeting the right people. But I think the real sort of gem and the nugget of that is like, you just kind of keep showing up, putting yourself in different situations. I remember going to like anime conventions where I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, you're pretty nervous when you're like 18, 19, and
Yeah.
you've never really talked to anybody about comics before. But doing that and putting yourself in, I think, those uncomfortable waters really challenges you in a way to be able to communicate what you love about the medium. And that's what I feel like has been a big cornerstone of my success in my career success.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, definitely an interesting path. I'm curious, like if you going back, like what was sort of your entry point or initial reaction, initial impression of the world of crowdfunding, when it first sort of came on the scene? I know like retailers, especially people with retailer backgrounds, like sometimes that was like a little scary for retailers for a while in the early days where they're like how is this going to affect us or will it affect us, but then also just from a creator's, like a lot of creators are skeptical of the new thing or just like, hey, this can't possibly work, and a lot of opinions have changed over the years. But do you remember like going back what first got you sort of interested in the world of crowdfunding?
So my first real introduction to crowdfunding, specifically Kickstarter, was I was really into the Thrilling Adventure Hour for a long time. I don't know if you're familiar with that show, but it's a serialized stage show in the style of old time radio.
Hmm.
And so it's like performers like Paul F. Tompkins and Paget Brewster and Mark Gagliardi. They would stand on a stage with microphones, read from scripts, and that was a podcast that I followed for a while with a live show component. And they eventually wanted to make a graphic novel and they funded that on Kickstarter.
Hmm.
And so I was like all bought in on that. And one of the rewards that they had was you can be an assistant editor on the book if you pay a certain, or like, I think it was like $300, $400 at the time.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I'm going to just see what this experience is like. Right. And so for me, my initial introduction outside of the retail space was it's what I think is still very much the ethos of Kickstarter of this is a well-loved community or a well-loved product that this thing is niche enough that it goes to the direct market, it is probably not going to do all that well, or it may not exist without the support of people who are really into it or people who really care about it. And so I got, I think, probably a very unique look at Kickstarter of here's an opportunity for you to be involved, but here's an opportunity for you to help like realize this thing, right? Kind of like the purest form, I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
we
Yeah.
think of Kickstarter. So I had a very positive experience with it. I think I understand, and still I think there's a lot of concern from the retailer community about Kickstarters and books there and how you get those two worlds to kind of intersect. But generally, I think people are starting now to see more of the benefit and see more of the potential for sales and getting new audience members in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it did. I remember like the first four projects or so on Kickstarter that I back all kind of failed miserably. But then, there were a few that like I supported that I'm just like, wow, this thing is really taking off, and it seems like it's got
Yeah.
a momentum of its own. And it was like, this could just work, and
Yeah.
and so to be here, Kickstarter's just turned 15, I think. So, it's definitely mature for what was at once a upstart tech startup, but it's mature now, and a lot of the best practices have sort of been laid out and things. But it's definitely like I do like to remember those early days of just like, wow, if this could work, this might be something.
And it was interesting too, and I think we're, everything's cyclical, right? Where I think we're coming back to a point now at 15 years where there's enough stability and foundation that there are people who are doing more innovative projects or maybe something that is not traditional. I think of this year, Tiffany Babb's The Comics Courier. I don't know if you saw that campaign, but it was a comics criticism journal in the comics category with a number of just like well-known comics creators and
Mm.
well-known Kickstarter creators who are contributing. I absolutely love seeing that. I think that's such a fresh addition and idea that the category needs, where we have a lot of long-standing, really great creators and really great content and series, but like seeing those fresh injections of new ideas and those new people feeling like, hey, I have a pretty niche. That campaign only made about $16,000, which is still very good, I think, for an initial idea like that. But it's such a niche approach that is pretty different than what is being currently offered. But if
Yeah.
somebody can come in, feel like it's a stable enough platform where they're able to make a success in that way, I'm all for it. That's like that's a big part of what I live for, right? And what gets me waking up in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, and Kickstarter is one of the avenues for something like that, can exist in the world. Where sort of the online comics journalism getting crowded out by all of the other things with how online blogs and things like that, where there's a time where that might have been something that would be easily supported, just but doing focused crowdfunding launches for something like that is definitely possible. And it is cool to see like products that will pop up in the comics category that aren't necessarily comics. I see you've got a cool spinner rack in the background, which is awesome. But I saw there was a spinner rack project of someone like
Yeah.
sort of redesigned the old fashioned spinner rack. Only this one, smartly, so it's not like $900 or whatever those things actually cost if you get a hand on them. So I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, so I mean, we've definitely talked about some of the positives in the world of comics and comics on Kickstarter. I'm curious what you sort of see as potentially some of the challenges brewing for creators today, people that are trying to get in there. I know, like one of them, for example, is this feeling that how much can the Kickstarter market bear? And, it was an up year, another 5%. It's probably every year more or less the number of projects has been increasing. And I think, I saw, I think a high of like around 350 projects at one point, at the highest, so, which is a lot. It's a lot of projects. Do you think that's a concern for creators and then there's also the fact that it seems like most of the outside of Marvel and DC, most other publishers are trying to increase their either volume or the kinds of projects that they're launching on the platform, which is great for Kickstarter. But I know some of the creators that listen to this show are like, oh, what is this going to mean for the sort of independent? I don't know, thoughts on volume and what it means for the creators.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely think in working with more mainstream publishers, that has definitely been a concern of mine. And I think Boom did something really great at the beginning when they did Berserker, where there was a stretch goal where if they hit a certain amount of money, and they did, they would give, I think, $100 to 10 projects. And ultimately they did. And I know I talked to one of the creators, Doug Wood, who had a project at that time, who got that money, and it helped him sort of get across the finish line. So I understand that challenge of mainstream publishers. There is that perception that they take away a lot more audience than independent publishers or independent creators would normally be getting. I think it's like it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Where they're bringing a lot of new backers in, and I think one of my challenges and opportunities in the role is how do I keep those GI Joe people on the platform and finding similar things? And I think some of that opportunity and responsibility really does fall on those mainstream publishers, right? Because
Right.
they are ultimately like this guiding voice within the community. They're in comic shops already and have more real estate than the independent publisher. So I'm working with them to give more back to the community, be it through stretch goal programs like
Yeah.
that or highlighting those in updates. In terms of volume, I don't know how I feel about that. I think again that kind of falls on how we highlight projects, right? Which projects we put in our newsletters. I started one thing that I've been focused on in the past year and again in this year is more focused comics communication. So you probably saw, and some of your listeners probably saw, that I've started doing a monthly comics newsletter. So instead of just the projects we love and the new and trending, which go out every week, this is a monthly newsletter and is just to a comics audience. The other two that I mentioned go out very broadly to anyone who's backed on Kickstarter, and they're inclusive of all of the categories on the site, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes comics are in there, sometimes they get buried amongst some of the other things, or sometimes people just aren't interested, right? Uh, so I've been trying to think of more pointed communication so I can isolate more of the projects that I think do deserve that spotlight and making sure that it is a blend of, independent publishers and independent creators and the occasional mainstream publisher. They don't need as much help, I think, as everybody else does, right? Because they already have those audiences and frankly money for marketing programs to get out. But that's one thing that I've been thinking about as well.
Yeah. And I think that it speaks to like there are ways that these giant publishers or these big publishers can come in and do one of the fundamentals that I recommend all creators do, and I think you do as well, is just be a good member of the comics Kickstarter community. Back other projects, get involved, spread, share other things that you think is cool. And I know that there was a study or a report that looked at like the massive amount of backers that were first time backers that came in like with the Brandon Sanderson Kickstarters
Mm.
and saw that a lot of them ended up going on and continuing to back other Kickstarter projects in the publishing category. So I've always been a advocate that rising tide lifts all, and the hardest thing to do is get someone to back that first project. But once they're
Totally.
in, comic fans are comic fans and not always just one single thing fan. So yeah, that's something that I think we can still go ahead and not worry too much about. So other challenges that come to mind for you or things that you're just like you have your eye on?
I think, both we're in a period of economic uncertainty, I'll say, to sort of be diplomatic about it.
Yeah.
I think you did a really great job laying that out in your tariff
Oh,
station. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on and just keeping people aware of. My whole ethos as a creator is like try and be realistic about what I'm building, and I want to impart that onto new creators and longtime creators as well of don't overpromise or try and make something crazy just to catch a ton of people and get new fans in the door. Try and continue to do something that feels realistic and that you can scale. The two other areas of concentration I'm thinking of this year are there's a lot of not safe for work content on Kickstarter. People talk to me about it. You can see it if you go to the site. I will say this because I got a message about it over the weekend. If there's stuff that people are uncomfortable with or feel like really skirts a line, like we're always open to having that conversation, right? Like
mm,
we take a lot of trust and care in our trust and safety team to make sure that everything that is going out is within a certain acceptable guideline. But there sometimes are things that come through that is just not appropriate for public consumption. But that's all to say that like there's two kind of different camps in not safe for work for Kickstarter, right? There are the people who want to see it. And if you look at the numbers and you look at how successful those projects are, there are people who want that kind of content.
yeah.
And I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum. I'm not here to pass judgment. I'm happy to support those like acceptable, respectable things on Kickstarter. And then there are people who just did not sign up to see that, right? And so the My job and our Kickstarter job becomes how do we serve both those audiences without having anybody feel ostracized? And so that's something that I'm thinking about as well. And I have some plans in place that I can't talk about on this call, but there are things that I'm working on to better serve those audiences and make everyone feel like they have equal lanes here at Kickstarter. And then the last thing that I'm thinking of is how do I convince more retailers to buy Kickstarter books? I have seen, I don't know if you followed Knapsack magazine from Lucky Pocket Press. They had a small campaign, I think 2023 or maybe late 2024. Their book in stores, and then looking like doing a little googling on it, I found that it was funded on Kickstarter, but they were had a retailer tier, and some retailers bought their books. And I think, not every retailer is going to order every book on Kickstarter, right? They have to make decisions based on what their audience wants, what their funds, what their available funds are. But I do want to create a more open channel with retailers so they at least know what the options are available, so they don't have to dig through the site because they already have to do so much between Lunar and Diamond in terms of like sitting down and FOCing and ordering. I think there are better ways for us to just be visible about here are the campaigns that have retailer tiers, here are the options that you have available this month. Order what you think is going to do best in your store. And hopefully that just like increases the level of visibility of the great content that's coming out on Kickstarter.
Yeah, and retailer tiers is something that I mean, we've sold a lot of those over the years for the Comics Tribe projects that we've done. Definitely when there are things that we've done that seem to just help encourage that along, like offering, the around a 50% discount on bundles of things that are larger so that they're not getting confused with other pledges and sort of calling out the nature of it. Things like including like a mini print that we give the option to have the store brand it so that they have like this exclusive little print that with their logo on it, and then combining sort of retailer options with some customizability so that hey, if maybe you can get a retailer exclusive cover or a cameo or a shout out to your shop in the book at some point, if that makes sense. So there's definitely a lot of ways that it can be done. I do know retailers being what they are, it's very hard to commit, pay in full, and then
Sure.
it won't come in hand for months. That's stuff that you could be putting into the thing that'll be on the shelf very quickly. So I totally understand that. But if creators are offering retailer tiers, but they don't necessarily have a big contact list of retailers, is there any way that signal that or that Kickstarter can help? Because I know you talked about wanting to potentially find ways to let retailers know when a project has retailer tiers, but how would a creator let Kickstarter know, hey, we've got some good deals over here? Is that something that?
So going back to one thing you said before I addressed that question, so I spoke to a group of retailers at New York Comic Con. We sponsored a retailer day at the top of the show. So it was Wednesday before the show. And I fully understand that concern of, hey, I don't want to spend money on something I'm not going to get for a year or 2 years, what have you. I did run some numbers last year and found that 70% of projects plan to fulfill within 90 days. So that is, pretty similar to, I think, what people expect of ordering from Diamond. They'll get something in 2 or 3 months. I think that expectation, or that maybe that myth of things are going to take a little bit longer, is
Yeah.
starting to dispel a little bit, but still valid depending on what project that you're backing and how you
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
about it.
I realized I had a couple projects that I backed from the Obama administration that are still outstanding, but that yearly update still comes. But it's few and far between. And as you said, Kickstarter has the most repeat creators. That only happens if you deliver, right?
Right,
So
right, right. To the point about how do creators let us know so we can let retailers know, without getting too specific, we have a lot of reporting ability at Kickstarter, right? So I have the ability to like take a look at the site and take a look at very specific slices of data. So I'm able to find any project that lists retailer as a tier. right? I built a report so I can pull that information in. And if you, on an upcoming Comics Tribe project, say we have a retailer tier, I can look at that report on a monthly, biweekly, however basis and see those. So I'll be able to identify those. And my hope is to build a newsletter that goes out to retailers who have opted into wanting to see Kickstarter projects, right? So my goal with talking to retailers, I may or may not go to Comics Pro this year just because I don't have that newsletter in place yet. So as of time of recording, so I don't really want to bombard them with similar things if they've heard it before. But the best way for you to let me know is by including a retailer tier, and you can either just do that and I should be able to find it, or you can send me a note and say, hey, I have a retailer tier. Let me know if you can include me in any upcoming newsletters. But, going back to the more pointed communication, I feel like that's really where the opportunity is this year of getting communication set up that run pretty easily or run on their own, that talk to specific audiences, and just try to isolate what those needs are rather than trying to create a solution that does everything for everybody. Comics is so we have such specific between like the direct market and the book market and like independent creators. Everybody has really specific needs that are sometimes separate but equal in really interesting ways. It's
Yeah.
like it's the part of my job I love the most is like, how do I create solutions for these people that can also benefit this group of people? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. It kind of comes down to, technical limitations and limitations of time, but
Yeah.
it's fun to think of ways that come or can make the community better. And then ultimately it's fun to like measure how those do and see if they've been successful.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those nice things about, a system that is already working and working well for so many. A series of 1 to 2% improvements can, over time, contribute to just, a better platform pretty easily. I did want to so you brought up the not safe for work project thing. I definitely had that flagged, and I know that there were some creators in my community that had questions on it. I don't know if you've checked out Kevin Laporte has been doing some cool stuff on Substack. He's a frequent Kickstarter creator, but he basically has taken it upon himself to analyze literally every single comic project that launches on Kickstarter each day, just does a daily update, categorizes them by type of a genre, and gives his own commentary. I think he's really just kind of leaned in, but and then from that he's sort of doing his own little analysis, and he found that first he looked in November and was trying to answer that question, like, is Kickstarter being too dominated by the sort of not safe for work projects, and found like in November, like on one particular day he did like, he found like 6% of projects were just in the not safe for work, which doesn't sound like that much. And then he checked again in December over the 30-day period. He was like, oh, well, wait a minute. Not safe for work is by far the most popular category this month, and something like 25 to 30% of projects would be classified in there. And I guess like I'm wondering, do you like, is there concern or about like, that Kickstarter, or if the spicy stuff is perceived as the overwhelming content there, like, does that lead to bad outcomes down the line? Or I don't know. Is it hard
I
to
don't
say?
know. It's hard to say because I had a conversation with a creator early on when I started who, expressed concern about, I don't want to see those projects on my projects recommend
Mhm.
page.
Yep.
He said I don't feel comfortable opening up Kickstarter in public because I'll see that stuff and I don't want whatever judgment a stranger is going to pass on me for having that on my phone, what have
Mm.
you. And I know that he and some other people just don't back those, but those projects are still successful, right?
Right.
So it's like the not safe for work audience is speaking for itself, but in a way is almost like uh, is a bit self-contained, I
Yeah.
feel. And then we're still seeing growth in projects that are not safe for work, and we're seeing people still successful come into the table with an issue number one that then they follow up with number two, number three, number four. I don't know. I don't want to say there's ultimately like a bad outcome. I do. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not I'm not concerned about it yet, I'll say. I could see things maybe spinning out of control or things getting more concentrated. But yeah, to Kevin's point, like it waxes and wanes every couple of months, or over the months. Yeah, I'm not, I don't know. I'm not as concerned about it right
Yeah.
now, to be
And,
honest.
and I know like there was one story last year of a project that was in that category and then sort of had a Stripe shut down or and when I actually did some digging, it did seem like the language in the Stripe bylaws could be perceived as like, hey, pretty much all these projects technically, like by letter of the law, seem like they could be shut down or could be, denied Stripe connection. But I did not like rather than that be suddenly like the a foreboding of things to come. It seemed like more of a one-off, but I don't know if you have any further insight
I
on
will
there.
say, that does happen occasionally, and unfortunately, I can't really speak to like Stripe is its own payment entity, right? And
Right.
they operate in their own sort of system of rules and regulations. And so there's things that we can do to advocate for those longtime creators if they've been on the platform for a while and they experience an issue with Stripe. We will do everything in our power to advocate for that creator and resolve the issue, but sometimes we are unfortunately up to the whim of what Stripe decides they want to enforce,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate, but it's something that we're aware of. I also want to say, just talking about not safe for work creators in general, not every not safe for work creator is just creating not safe for work content, if that makes sense. Like I think
Right.
about Pat Shand, who has like cheeky comics and does some not safe for work spicy content, but then has a number of other books that are just like, completely just comics for the sake of comics, right?
Right.
And I would encourage, I think the opportunity in seeing the rise of not safe for work is doing more pointed outreach to those creators or talking to them about what else you guys have. Not safe for work is doing really well, but if there are people who don't want it, there's now a whole other untapped audience that may be interested in, other kinds of content. So
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
hoping I'm hoping it can, people can see the opportunity to continue to build a media empire in the way that like Pat has or Kat and Phil
Phil,
have.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of options there, and I think some people are that there's like writing to the market and trying to force the
Yeah.
market to you, and then a lot of times it's when you have a number of at bats at this and try different things and follow the success that lights you up while also the audience responds to it. So every creator is going to sort of make their own decision about it, and I think the nice thing about Kickstarter is compared to just about every other platform out there, every creator starts with the same blank template, and you fill it out, and you're going to have a page on this platform, and we'll go from there. And so, while obviously certain IPs or veterans are going to have institutional advantages and advantages that in terms of mailing lists and other things that others don't have as far as opportunity and space on the platform, I think it's about as equal as it gets out there. I mean, there isn't an industry that AI isn't a buzzword and having ripple effects. And so I guess I'd like to hear just, your personal feelings on sort of the future and or role of AI in comics creation, and then, what Kickstarter is sort of where Kickstarter is coming down with it, and then go from there. Yeah.
So, I mean, personally, I am not a fan of AI. I make role-playing games, as you said at the top of the show. I used an engine one time because a friend told me that he was able to write a bunch of spells very quickly off of it, and I tried it and just really had a terrible
Mm.
experience in just terms of like it felt like the amount of time it would take for me to finesse the prompt to get what I want. I should just spend that time writing the thing
Hmm.
that I want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just seeing, I think it's a really the distilling of like creativity is what gets me about it, right? Where it's like companies saying, "Hey, I can generate these images so quickly to get this out there. I don't need to pay anybody. It just takes a little bit of time." It's so antithetical to how I like to create. If you look at every one of my games, it's different art, right?
Yeah.
Even within Henshin, which is my most popular game, it features modules of pre-made adventures. All of those are from different artists, and I get so much joy out of interacting with those people, sharing my vision about what I want the art to ultimately be, and then like getting back what I get back from them and sort of finding that like happy middle ground where everyone's happy about it. So I don't like AI. I see some value in it in terms of ideation, if that makes sense, in
Yeah.
terms of if someone wanted to mock something up that they didn't have a clear vision for, or just wanted to sort of see what an initial idea could look like. I think there's maybe some value there, but the like commercialization and the monetization of it is something that I'm against. In terms of on the platform, I think we've talked back and forth about it in an email, and
Yeah.
you shared my response on one of your podcasts. Like we do allow some use of AI as long as that information is very clearly disclosed in terms of how you're using it and in what ways you're using it, making sure that you're crediting any artists that whose work you take in or use elsewhere. But I will say that, we also have a pretty keen eye on any projects that come through. I shut down a project a couple of weeks ago that the project had stolen from like Mindy Wheeler's page,
Hmm.
stolen her like about section. It was just AI generated images of like sexy women, and even the author photos seemed like it was AI generated, and we were able to identify and shut that down.
Yeah.
We have a pretty keen eye both with our human oriented review process and some of our automatic checks that we are keeping a keen eye out for those. I think is maybe the word I would use, is people trying to use AI to their advantage to
Yeah.
make a quick buck.
Yeah, and I'm
I'm
really
not
curious.
crazy about it.
I'm curious, like when there was like a proliferation where it was like every day 5 to 10 were dropping for a little bit, and I was just curious, like, is this one actor that wrote a script that could generate a Kickstarter profile, fill out a bio, like do all this stuff? But because the fact that they were like, it'd be one thing if they were doing that and then like setting a really low goals so that they could just
Sure.
cash in quickly. But they were setting like $50,000 goals and projects that had been up for a couple of days with one backer or zero backers, and it was just like it's it seemed like a waste. But I'm just like, are you just training this technology, and are they gonna keep coming back, like the zombie horde will keep testing the fences before, and then all of a sudden they'll come back with 3.0, 4.0 that is like fooling everybody. Like the reasoning behind it is a little suspect to me.
Totally. And but I think, to the point you just made, which I think is still true, is like the community continues to be so strong on Kickstarter that when
Yeah.
you do see those suspect projects, when they like maybe they slip under our radar, maybe they seem legit to us and we let them slide, those, as far as I've seen, very rarely get funded, very
Yeah.
rarely get the attention that like a more legitimate comics campaign does. And I think the community knows, because here's the thing that you can't really generate through AI. You can generate content, right? You can
Mm.
make a book, make a 600-page book in a fraction of the time it would make you to traditionally make it. You can't do the same for the community. You can't do the same for the promotion. Like you can't do the same for sort of that like
Yeah.
Kickstarter is kind of like we've digitized hand selling a little bit. And like you just can't do that with AI generated content in the same way. And I think that's going to be the ultimate failure of it on Kickstarter,
Yeah.
is they will need to hire some or create some weird bot that like knows how to do it. Maybe they will. I mean, maybe I'm creating a self-fulfilling prophecy here,
Right.
but
Yeah. AI
yeah,
does not seem to have the ability yet to, with quick prompt, generate sequential images that actually tell a story with like fully lettered finished stuff. And that becomes one of the telltale signs for these projects is like, you're launching the comics category. You're saying you're a comic. There isn't a single page of comic book to be
yeah.
seen on your page. And I'm also wondering, like at a certain point, if like, is that needs to be a requirement just even to make it through the review process. Like if you're launching a comic book and you can't show a comic page, like, yeah,
No,
but
I think that's a very valid thing.
yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting world we live in with these tools, and they're coming out, and I, you know, and it is, I think that combined with the not safe for work projects for people that are clearly just doing cash grabs projects, like that's something that I think is like, all right, well, you're gonna push the envelope on these varying cover things, because one thing AI has plenty to work with is, or generative AI art has plenty to work with, is like pinup art that they can
Yeah.
just generate, tons and tons of kind of generic sexy, and it seemed, and shockingly those seem to sell like when attached with not safe for work projects. So I don't know, I it's something we're definitely keeping an eye on. I wanted to just one more sort of Kickstarter challenge thing is like, how are you guys sort of seeing your competition in 2025? I think Kickstarter for a lot of categories still has like a 90% market share, and but backer kits out there. Indiegogo is still going, Zoop, and then also there's creators potentially like launching their own sort of private launch vehicles. I think Brian Polito has got his first launch under his sort of coffin launch own platform that's coming up.
Mm.
And I'm going to be curious to see the results. I know other creators have done that before. A lot of times I see them do that, come back to Kickstarter, or because they don't get the same results that they had on the platform. But I'm curious, like, is there things that are on your radar, or things that just, how does Kickstarter feel about the competition?
So I mean, my general rule of thumb is that like I am always curious to hear about people's experiences on other platforms because I think it helps Kickstarter become stronger, right?
Yeah.
We have some things that you've seen roll out last year with late pledges, which is I think, kind of a direct result of the fact that so many people use backer kits. Pre-order stores for a long time,
Yeah.
post-campaign. We also now have a more robust pre-launch page, so you can do more just like pre-launch marketing and offer. I've seen a number of people offer, here's the first chapter of my comic on Global Comics, or they make it more available for new backers to be able to, whet their appetite, so to speak. I think those are all direct results from the fact that a lot of our creators used BackerKit for a while and shared feedback with us about what's missing. So I do, my rule of thumb is I am open to a healthy amount of competition within the space. I think what's interesting about BackerKit is I just don't think they have the community for comics on there. I
Yeah.
think they're maybe more of a games oriented platform at this point. If you look at the Comictopia numbers from last year, they funded 24 projects within, I think it was a month period or a 3-week period. We funded, I think, 136 in that same period, just without an event, without
Right.
any natural event. I think that speaks to the power of the community. For things like Zoop, my understanding of Zoop's business model and how they handle crowdfunding is a very different way than how Kickstarter does it. I think it is more of a white, I don't know how much you got into that on your show, but it is a more white glove service where I think
Yeah.
they do a bit more of the campaign creation for you. Where Kickstarter, it is one thing I love about the platform is and my job is I can give a ton of advice and consultation, but ultimately like your success is your own, right? You make your page, you put up what you think is great, and it is all about how you want to sell your book. And I think that is a very empowering thing. I understand why people would want to go to Zoop, but I think it's harder to grow your business and your presence as an independent creator
Mm.
as opposed to like if you're a longtime comics person and you want to put out an art book and you kind of just want to keep drawing and have somebody else handle the business side of it, then like
Yeah.
Zoop might be the right fit for you. But if you want to be the next Brian Polito, then like come over to Kickstarter. We'll help you do that. And then, yeah, if people want to do their own individual stuff, I'm also interested in that. I actually wasn't really aware of the coffin launch thing. I'm talking to Brian in a little while. So I'm just curious about. I think what's so interesting about crowdfunding is it is a constant space of innovation,
Yeah.
right? And if there are things, again, to the backer kit point, if there are things that Brian is doing or wanting to do that we don't normally do, then like that's just a conversation I need to have with Brian, right? About
Yeah.
like, oh, hey, what's missing? How can we make Kickstarter better? But I also I will probably gain a lot of new insight and ideas just learning from him and how he does things. Because while I'm touted as a Kickstarter expert, I've had a lot of success on the platform over my years. My favorite thing about life in general is like there's always something I don't know, right? The unknown unknown. And I
Yeah.
think like that's just kind of crowdfunding in general. People are gonna do things vastly differently than how they've done before, and it is like going to make some sort of impact or wave in the space. And so I welcome that healthy amount of competition. I also I'm coming from a place of privilege where like Kickstarter is 15 years strong. We do have a huge amount of the market share, and people see us as like the go-to crowdfunding platform. So I think I can say all these things and welcome competition because we have such a solid foundation and people know that they can be successful on the platform, but that allows us to only make things better for everybody in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we're actually lucky that Kickstarter came about when it came about in terms of, I think it came out of like the housing crisis, and like it was in that area where like the times were kind of tough. I think in
Yeah.
another world, if like it was like massive venture capital going in,
Yeah.
and Kickstarter launched afterwards, like Kickstarter might be taking 20% off the top, and that would be industry, and that would have been industry standard. Like I think creators like we may like they may go to other places for this feature or that feature, but I've long think like it's a good thing that massive like massive returns on and squeezing the creator ever more like some of the other big platforms do has not been the fundamental ethos of Kickstarter. I think we're very lucky at that. And so, yes, competition is good. I think especially under Everett, it seems like a lot of like I mean I said on the podcast like the Kickstarter platform and some fundamental assumptions and tools and things that it can do have changed probably more in the last year and a half than in the previous 10 years that I've been covering it on the podcast. So it definitely kept my content fresh. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear.
Yeah. So one another a question that I just had just in terms of trends and things and Kickstarter trying new stuff. I did see in the games category that Kickstarter like signed exclusive deal with a games publisher recently. Uh,
I
I saw it on the blog.
Yeah.
There was a particular thing, I was like, I'm
Mm.
wondering, huh? Like, I wonder if because I do know like BackerKit tries to sort of poach big names and goes out there and they have salespeople or people that are aggressively reaching out, sending cold emails and things like that. And I was just wondering, like, I wonder, like, would Kickstarter pursue publishers for Kickstarter exclusive deals or like we are the exclusive crowdfunding platform? It didn't really seem like. I mean, I think there's a lot of creators that are like, well, yeah, Kickstarter is my exclusive crowdfunding platform, but I thought that was interesting. I don't know if that's something that is a
That's,
trend
you
or
know,
just a one-off.
I would say it's probably more of a one-off. That's not something that we've talked a ton about, and it's not something that is, I think, going to become the norm here at Kickstarter.
A quick couple things. Project We Love tag. What's one thing creators can do to up their chances that you or someone at Kickstarter is going to love their stuff?
The thing I always tell people is have, as you said, have comic pages available. I think comics is a real show, don't tell game. So don't give away too much of your story or feel like you really have to tell me about everything that's going to happen in the book. I've seen that in some campaigns as well. But have, a short but sweet description of your book, have comic content. The big thing that I've been harping on last year and will continue to do in this year is have shipping information available in the story of your campaign. Tell me what I'm going to pay postage, tell me how it's going to be shipped out, through who. A lot of people don't do that. I know people bake that sometimes into the tier of their campaign or they have it in backer kit, but that information I think needs to be really front and center. And then lastly, like most people do a video, so it's not as big of a concern, but like video's great. Like it's the best way for you to market as far as I'm concerned. It makes this easier for us to market your product. So have a video, even put something together where you're sitting in front of your iPhone just talking about your comic or comics that you love. Like I want to see that stuff. That makes it a lot easier for me to pass that along to the team.
Awesome. I'd be remiss if I didn't repeat like the most requested feature that people in my comics community still want is, and this is especially true, I think, for comics because we have the most repeat launches, is just the ability to pool all of your Kickstarter backers into one message group rather than sending messages or updates to all. And I'm just curious if I guess I'm curious if that's ever on the roadmap or if that might be coming or if you don't know, that's fine. But I'd be remiss if I didn't pass that along.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I will say it's definitely something that it's a request that we're aware of because both comics and games
Games.
especially, I mean, that's the same thing, games and publishing. So I can't speak specifically as to whether or not it's on the roadmap, but I can share that it is something that we are very aware of.
Awesome. Well, Sam, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. Pleasure to get to know you and get to meet you. And I thank you so much for your time here. Is there any events or things that people can catch you at coming up soon, or any
Uh,
final things you want to share?
I think the first show I'll be at this year is probably Emerald City Comic Con, and then I'll be at TCAF in May. So beginning of the year is a little bit lighter for me. I'll thankfully be working from home for a little while. But no, thank you so much for your time, Tyler. I'm a fan of the podcast. I'm very excited to be on the show and be able to talk with you. And I think it's just a great way to start off the year. I'm looking forward to 2025 for the comics category. And I'll say to any listeners, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you want to continue conversations. As I'm available, I'm happy to make time and I will find a way to make time for you. My door's always open. I'm here for the community, right? I don't want to I think one thing that's so important about my role is I need to be here and in a supportive role where I am both a face and an authority in the community, but I never want to overshadow the creators that are there, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the balance that I'm trying to strike, and I hope I was able to present that in today's interview.
Absolutely, Sam. I'm glad our audience get to know you.